Secret Circle.
Welcome to the Secret Circle with me, Luke Deckard, the podcast where I chat with authors, filmmakers, musicians, and more about the art of their craft and let you in on some of their secrets. Today's guest is crime fiction author Heather J Fitt. Her books include Open Your Eyes, The Flight, and The Boat Trip. But we're not talking crime fiction today. We're talking about Heather's deep-seated love of the horror genre. So I'm very excited to bring Heather on. Heather, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So, you're a crime writer, but you have you really love the horror genre. Now, is this just like film horror or books and film?
So it's both, really. However, I find I am far more creeped out by book horror than I am film horror. And film horror is more about jump scares for me rather than actual creepiness. Although there are a couple of films that have just leapt to mind that actually say the opposite. But yeah, I like them both. But yeah, I prefer the creepy horror books rather than, anything sort of werewolfy or vampire-y or anything like that.
Interesting. When did you first fall in love with the horror genre, and was it through books or was it through film?
Interestingly, no, it was through film. Actually, I went through a stage in my teenage years where I I basically wanted to be liked a lot, so I didn't read very much. None of my friends were reading, so I didn't. I watched films with them instead, and they tended to be into the horror films. And I remember being at school. I was at a boarding school in the Highlands of Scotland, 6 miles from the nearest village of 500 people. So this is really remote.
Perfect horror setting.
Oh, exactly. And this is part of the problem. We watched Scream in this really remote setting. And we sneak in other horror films that we really shouldn't be watching, and we watch those as well.
Yeah.
And that's where I really sort of fell in love with it. And then when I went back home from boarding school, my friends were all into horror films, but they were showing me the 70s and 80s slasher films. And it was around that time where I said, I really want to study films at university. I studied media and film studies at university and managed to do quite a lot of stuff around horror films, got away with that quite a bit.
Nice. So Scream was like your gateway drug into the horror genre. So it wasn't books, it was that. When you kind of started expanding your horizons into books, what were some of the books that stood out to you?
I suppose like a lot of people, I was sort of reading Stephen King. I mean,
sure,
he's your go-to guy.
The king of horror.
The king of horror, right? I mean, and I will probably get shot for saying this, but I really prefer his early stuff. I'm not such a fan of his later stuff, I have to say. So I kind of...
So sorry, Stephen, if you're listening.
Yeah, sorry, Stephen, but I prefer the early stuff. Anyway, but I'm still making my way through that. And I didn't really read, like I say, I didn't really read a lot of horror or ghost type books. I remember reading one book it was actually when I was a kid, so I was probably about 9 or 10. It's called The Haunted Mountain. And it's a kid's book, and it is about a real life mountain in Scotland called Ben Macdui, which is the second highest mountain in Great Britain, in Scotland. And it's supposed to be haunted by the Great Grey Man. And let me tell you, when I walked up that mountain when I was at school, I was looking everywhere for the Great Grey Man. But yeah, as I say, I didn't read a lot of horror when I was younger. It was something that I sort of came to a little bit later.
Yeah, I get that. I guess kind of the same. Whereas as a kid, I didn't grow up reading horror. And even to this day, I don't read a lot of horror. I probably watch more than I read, but I also don't even watch that much. So it's still it's a genre that I'm like, I dip my toe in every once in a while. But I remember becoming interested in it when I was around 10-ish. It was I have this really vivid memory of it, and I was riding on my bike in town, in my little hometown where I grew up in Midwest America, in Indiana. It was autumn so the leaves were changing. Everything was kind of like that kind of spooky. The spooky season for me lasted from October into November, and then once December hits, then it's a hard hit and it's Christmas. But there is this umbrella of spookiness between October and November for me. And yeah, so I remember like riding on my bike and thinking about Frankenstein and then being like, I really want to watch Frankenstein. Like the 1931 movie or 19
Yeah.
whatever, yeah, 1931. And then like went and rented that from the library and started watching that and then became really addicted to the early Universal monster movies. Which were my gateway into the horror genre. And I would every Halloween season I would have to rewatch those movies. I'd have to rewatch Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula, things like
Mhm.
that. But I'd watch anything else that was on at the time, whether that's like various versions of Sleepy Hollow and whatnot. So I've always sort of had this love of all things horror, but weirdly enough, I've never really invested much time
Mhm.
in like studying the horror genre on a whole, to some degree. But then there's other films like there's other horror films like for that I would call horror, like Jaws and things like that
Mhm.
I kind of like that a little bit more. Um, but
You like a
we'll
monster film. You like a
say
monster
again.
horror. You like
Yeah,
a monster horror.
I do. That for me is where I'm the most happy, I think. Slasher horrors are fun, but I like the ideas of Freddy Krueger and Jason and Chucky, and those were huge pop culture icons as a kid. Me and my friends all knew about them.
Mhm.
Um, but and it's weird. It's so weird to think about being a kid in the 90s and these like R-rated horrible monsters are like really popular with 7, 8, 9, 10 year olds.
Yeah.
Because it was such a weird time where and I love this is what I love about that era is they marketed this stuff to kids. Like Predator, Alien, there was
Mhm.
all RoboCop, Terminator, all these R-rated movies that you wouldn't be able to see for another like 20 years, like because you're not old enough, but you'd be able to see it on television and stuff, I guess. But like they marketed all that stuff to kids with the toys and stuff. So for us, it was just always a thing, and we loved the looks of it and the ideas of it and the thrill of it. So I guess I loved all this stuff as a kid, but like again, I wasn't reading much of it, but I was watching that the monstery sort of horror stuff more
Mm.
than like ghosty ghosty stuff. But like I said, I liked like the Predator, the Jurassic Park, the Jaws. I like that more than like the Jasons and the Freddy Krueger. Um, but here's a question: what makes a good horror story?
Well, I suppose horror in film is a bit like crime fiction in books in that it is a huge umbrella.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you've got your ghosts, your vampires, your werewolves,
Mm,
Frankenstein. You've got just the slasher films. There's such a huge range.
mm,
But I think for me, a really good horror film has to be something, even with, dare I say it, vampire and ghost films and all this, it has to be kind of believable in a way. It has
totally.
to have, I think we call it magical realism in
Yeah.
books these days, but it has to have this realism about it,
Yeah.
because if you can relate, it makes you more scared.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think jump scares aren't necessarily everything. I think in slasher
Hate
films,
them.
as in you just hate them in general, or you don't enjoy them happening to you.
I to me they're cheap. They're cheap. They're cheap
Sure.
scares. They're not. It's not a real scare. Like for example, Paranormal Activity. Hate it. Not
Mhm.
because it's scary, but because it's such a cheap. It's a cheap thrill. A bit like going on a roller coaster, I guess. It's like, okay, everything's really quiet, and then there's just a big bang, and you're
Mhm.
scared. You're startled. You're not scared. You're
Yeah,
startled, and I'm like,
that's a good point.
that's not horrific to me. But if it's like, I mean, I was just talking about this and not being massively in love with it, but like if you have something like Jason, who you're like, this thing is out there, and or like Jaws, like
Mm.
the monster is out there, and you don't know if you're going to survive the night. That becomes scary, and when he does burst through the doors and stuff like that, then
Yeah.
it is scary more so than if it's like, oh, I'm just gonna smack some pots and pans around, but you know, invisible monster is poltergeisting around. It's just like, eh.
So it's like, you know, he's out there and you know he's coming for you, but you just don't know when or where.
Yeah,
And I think that puts you on edge all the
definitely.
way through. But also I like the creepy build. Well, I say I like the creepy build up. I'm more scared by a creepy build up than I
Hmm.
am by, like you say, any kind of jump scare, even, you know, like Freddy jumping out or Jason jumping out.
Yeah.
The creepiness in, for example, The Others with
Yes.
Nicole Kidman. Now
Yeah.
that is a film that I will not watch by myself, even though I know of it. Even though I know every part of it,
It's
even though I've
fair
seen it a
enough.
dozen times, I will not watch it by myself.
Yeah, it's a great
Um,
film. I love. I
it's
that's a
brilliant.
yeah, love that one.
One of my favorites. And Sixth Sense, obviously, is a great
Hmm.
film.
Mm.
But I don't think that's as creepy. I mean, it
No,
has
it's not.
creepy elements, but it's not as creepy as the others.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Like that. That's a good one. I like elements of creepy because creepy can be done in so many different ways. Like the original Frankenstein movie has really creepy elements to it because Dr. Frankenstein is he himself seems unhinged and creepy. And then when you get the monster who's, you know, out and about and doing stuff, he's creepy in the way he is interacting and engaging with people and trying to learn. Even in like the Bride of Frankenstein, where he's like hanging out with the blind man and all that kind of stuff. There's just this air of creepiness going on with that kind of stuff that I love. Or like if you think about like The Shining, like
Mm,
I really like The Shining. I think it's a very good movie. I really like Doctor Sleep. I thought that was a really great sequel. That has really good creepy moments, and you're like, oh god, this is nuts, and because I think like they're not like it's not cheap. They're not like cheap
yeah.
scares, and I think that's what I like about it. Is it's like, you know, he is the whatever the kid is, Danny. Is his name Danny in The Shining? Is that his
Yeah,
name?
Danny.
Yeah. You know, he's seeing things, and you know, like the twins, all that kind of stuff, and that stuff is creepy because it's like it's handled so well,
Yeah.
I think, and it's not jumping in your face and then hiding. It's like there's two things there, or like all the blood, you know, the guy in the dog suit on, you know, like it's
Yeah,
creepy. It that to me is all
it's
creepy
creepy.
stuff.
Do you know, it's interesting because I watched The Shining again recently for the first time in a long time.
Mm,
Um, and I built it up in my head that psychologically I was already scared before I started watching the film,
short,
but
yeah.
it wasn't as scary as I remembered it.
No.
However, if you show me a corridor with swirly carpet, I'm going to start freaking out. If you show
Yeah.
me twins stood in the middle of any corridor, I mean, and that to me is
Yeah.
the sign of such a great film. Even if you've never seen that film, you know
Yeah.
that scene, you
Yes.
know that bit, and you know that something creepy and weird is happening
Yes.
around
Like
there.
a creepy movie that I like a lot, that I'm fine to be judged for this, but I really like The Secret Window with Johnny Depp. It's based on a Stephen King book or a short story. That is a really fun, suspenseful, suspense building story about this author who is confronted by this man named like John Shooter, who's like, you stole my story, and this whole thing is like, you fucked up. I'm not supposed to cuss on my podcast, but there we go. He's like, you screwed up my ending. You need to fix it. And there's this whole back and forth about this, and then like things start happening to Johnny Depp's character. Things around him, like, you know, things start getting broken, people start getting hurt or threatened, and you're thinking it's, you know, it's looking like it's this shooter guy, and then the ending just sort of blows up into this, you know, kind of similar to The Shining, where like there's this psychological twist to it all.
Hmm.
And when you get there, you're like, oh gosh, like this has been fairly creepy. And then when you kind of see behind the veil about what's really going on, you're like, oh gosh, yeah, and the ending is just also really. I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't seen this 20-year-old movie, but like the ending also has this really eerie, almost kind of sleazy vibe to it, where you're just like and I like that. That to me just is a really good example of a good horror film. But I'm not giving anything away, which means I'm being very vague about things. But I promise people, go watch it. It holds up pretty well, for a 2000s horror movie with Johnny Depp. Are there horror movies out there that like that people that you don't that people don't think are horror movies that you say are? So for example, I remember once I was talking with someone and I mentioned Jurassic Park as a horror movie, and they're like, "That's not a horror movie." I'm like, "Well, then what is it?"
Yeah.
Like, well, it's like an action movie. I'm like, "No, it's not."
There's a monster.
But do you? Yeah, I'm gonna say, do you agree that Jurassic Park it's sci-fi? It's sci-fi horror, is what that is. It's like Alien.
I would, yeah. I mean, it's not something I thought about before, but when you put it that way, I mean, it's exactly like Alien, right?
Yeah,
Really.
it's like you're trapped. You're trapped on an island, which could be you're trapped on a ship, or you're trapped on a boat, on a ship, or you're trapped in a house, in a haunted house. You got your deadly monsters out there, and that they're like Jason or the alien, right? And like Dr. Hammond, he's kind of like that Frederick Lauren character from the house. What's it called? The House on Haunted Hill, that with Vincent Price from way back in the day, where he's like the mastermind who's brought all these people to this haunted place, and they all start getting killed. Like it's totally horrific. It's not it's not an action. It has action in it, but it's not an action movie.
It's at the lower end of the horror franchise. Say lower, definitely. Not in terms of good or bad, but in terms of
yes,
the elements of the film.
Totally agree.
Same with Jaws. I mean,
same.
That's in there. And if we're going there, then Predator is definitely a horror film of some description, at least, as is Terminator.
Yeah.
They're just different types of monsters. They're sci-fi monsters, like you say.
Yeah.
I can't think of any other films that I would say were horror films that people may disagree with. Nothing springs to mind, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I just found it interesting. This person like, no way, Jurassic Park, no way. I'm like, but can't you not see the elements are all there? Like, come on.
This is up here with, is Die Hard a Christmas film?
Right, which it is.
Oh, absolutely it is. Of course it is.
Controversially, though.
Even if Bruce Willis says it isn't.
Well.
What does he know?
What does he know? What, literally? But controversially, what I was thinking is Die Hard is definitely a Christmas film, but what do you think about the idea that Lethal Weapon is the better Christmas action film?
Ooh, no. I have to say, Lethal Weapon is not on the list of Christmas films that we watch every year, whereas Die Hard is.
Should I explain why? Well, you finish. However,
I was going to say, however, I'm fairly certain I could get approval for it to be on there pretty quickly.
The thing is with Lethal Weapon, the first one, is like, while yes, there is tons of Christmas going on in the background of Die Hard, Christmas is smeared all over the screen with Lethal Weapon. Like, there's tons of Christmas music, there's tons of Christmas decorations, there's Christmas at the end. Like, it's so Christmassy that I'm like, I always tell people it's the better Christmas action film because it's more Christmassy. Not that it's a better action film. They're like comparable action films. They're both great. But I'm like, it's a better one. That's the more Christmassy one.
Basically what we're saying is this year on social media, when people start asking if Die Hard is a Christmas film, we are going to send them into a spin by proffering Lethal Weapon. And
exactly. Exactly.
I'm looking forward to that.
Yes. I'll put out like a YouTube short and say like Lethal Weapon is the better Christmas film, and I'll get like a bunch of hate responses.
It'll be fun.
This four-eyed freak doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, so back to horror.
Right.
What would you say are the key ingredients that a horror story needs, whether that's sci-fi or your ghost horror or your monster horror. Like, what are the key things that you think are important to that genre and that you need? Like, say, like with crime fiction, you need the mystery, you need the dead body, you need the person to solve the da 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 da.
It's not all that different, I don't
Mm,
think.
mm,
I mean, you need the conflict, but the conflict in horror films is fear.
yeah.
So your main character needs to, at some point, maybe not straight away, because in Scream,
Mm,
Sydney's not scared straight away.
no.
Um, Eventually, they need to be scared, probably
Mm,
about a quarter of the way through the film,
mm,
and that becomes the conflict which drives the film. But they can't be so scared that they're not willing to go and investigate. Because
yeah.
if they were that terrified, then they would just lock themselves in a room and wait
Like a
until
really
something
crap
came up.
protagonist.
Absolutely. There has to be a balance there, but the conflict and that slight, well, it's not slight fear, but that fear is important.
Yeah.
There also has to be a bad guy,
Mm.
or a bad woman. I don't think it,
A
and
bad
it can be
person.
a bad person, a bad monster, something that's coming to get you,
Yeah.
and who basically wants to kill you. I can't think of a horror film, even ghost films, they're after you for something.
Mm.
They're not just there to say, "Hi, I'm a ghost and I live in your house." They are looking for something, and they're generally there to scare the protagonist.
Casper the Friendly Ghost wants
Well,
nothing.
yes, but what about his uncles?
Well, they're dickheads, that's true.
Well, exactly. Thought we weren't cussing.
No, dickhead is appropriate. I just
Okay,
shouldn't say the F word. I'm trying to avoid
okay,
F word across the board.
fair enough. Um, and also, do you know what else a horror film needs?
What?
And I may get some backlash for this, but it needs a really good score. The music is
Yeah.
everything. The
Yeah.
music is everything. How are
Yeah.
you supposed to know what you're anticipating if there's no music there?
Well, okay. So this is controversial then. So I agree and I disagree. I agree that a good score is helpful for setting mood
Hmm.
for things. But do you not feel that at least in the last kind of 20 odd years with cinema in general, there's been too heavy a reliance on the score telling the audience what they should be feeling rather than the scene itself speaking for itself?
Yes, I do agree. And I suppose, well, no, that is what I meant by a really good score, as in, it helps, but it doesn't take over. So
Okay, yeah.
most of my, in fact, all of my favorite horror films are from at least 20 years ago. I like
Yeah.
the 70s, 80s, and 90s stuff
Yeah.
when the score was there to help, and some of them are just brilliant. I mean, I
Yeah.
love the score of Scream, for example, and also
Mhm.
the Jaws score. I mean, it's probably one of the
Yes.
most famous bits of music in the world, and
Yes.
if it wasn't there, we
Yes.
wouldn't know what was coming, and we
True.
wouldn't have this heightened anticipation. And I do think heightened anticipation stops the really crap jump scares.
Yes, because also I was thinking about with Jaws, like two scenes that always scare me despite knowing what's coming is, and these are if the music is there, the music is very subdued.
Mhm.
One scene is the bit where the two guys go fishing with the Christmas turkey on the dock, right?
Yeah.
And throws it in, and the shark takes it, and then like starts coming. We never see the shark, but like
Mhm.
the pier starts getting broken up, and the guy's trying to run away to get away before he falls in the ocean and gets eaten. Terrifying moment.
Mhm.
Terrifying moment that is not overrun by loud bombastic music. The other bit is when what's the scientist name played by the guy from Close Encounters?
Um, God,
That guy, the guy who's not
that guy, the
Brody.
scientist
Yeah,
guy.
I can't remember his name right now. It's fallen out of my head. But like when he goes underwater to investigate the sinking ship, right? That him and Brody find,
I know
and
exactly which bit you mean.
the dead body comes
Yeah.
flying out. That it's I'm pretty sure that scene is entirely silent until that moment where you
Mm.
see this the horror, and then there's some scory bustle. But like when he's underwater, it's pretty quiet and creepy, and you hear the of the bubbles coming out of the scuba gear and stuff. Like I love that stuff, and I'm like, yeah, like silence goes a long way with horror. But
But also,
it's cheap when you have the big clap, and that's how you scare people.
yeah, absolutely. But also, when you think about it, when you're underwater, when you personally are underwater, what can you hear? Nothing. So the whole point there is that
Yeah,
you feel like you're under the water as well,
yeah,
because it's mostly silent apart from the bubbles. It
yeah,
kind of it brings you in. It makes you a part of the movie. Therefore, when the body appears, we
yeah,
all jump because that's what we would do if we were under the water and that happened to us.
yeah, yeah. Is score more important than sound design? Because I think sound design can probably make things more creepy than sometimes the score can.
I think it's a balance. I don't
Hmm.
think you can say it's one or the other. I think there's a
Yeah,
definite balance there.
yeah, yeah. It's fair enough. That's fair enough. What in regards to horror today? So I'm thinking of things like The Haunting of Hill House, Paranormal Activity, Scream '90. Um, like, do you think horror is as good today as it was 15, 20 years ago, 30 years ago or more? Or is it that, there's still good ones out there. They just might not get enough attention. What's your take on modern horror then?
So I haven't really watched a lot of the modern horror stuff, if I'm honest,
Mm,
because once we got into the noughties, late
mm.
noughties, it just wasn't like the horror that I enjoyed. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
like Saw, for example.
Ugh.
Yes, I like a slasher film, but that just
It's
it
gratuitous.
yeah, exactly. It's gratuitous. There's no nuance to it. I mean, don't
Mm.
get me wrong, Scream is not the most subtle film in the world, but it's supposed to be. Do you know what I mean? It's like it's not trying to be. It's
Yeah.
there to tell you the rules of the slasher film
Yes.
and so on.
Yes.
But no, the gratuitousness of Saw and things like that just don't interest me in the slightest, to be honest with you.
Me
I
neither.
do think there's a resurgence of the creepy stuff like The Haunting of Hill House and
Mm-hmm.
that sort of thing. But again, they scare the bejesus out of me. My
Mm.
husband doesn't like them, so I don't watch them.
Fair enough. I mean, I liked The Haunting of Hill House until the end. I thought when they got to the end, did you see it at all then? I can't, did you?
No, I haven't watched it at all.
Okay. I won't spoil it then. It's probably maybe worth just like, maybe, I don't know. It depends if it's too much, then don't. But like, I liked most of the first season until they got to like the bit where where they started to explain things. And when they started explaining things, it got a little timey-wimey,
Mhm.
uh, less scary, and sort of kind of a lame explanation for
Yeah.
things. Almost like sort of a cop out, like, oh, all this scary stuff wasn't meant to be scary. Kind of like that. And I was like, well, you've kind of lost me now. I mean, there is some genuinely really great stuff in most of the series, but it's like the last like 2 to 3 episodes is when I was like, I think you've jumped the shark a little bit. And then I think like the other seasons are the house, but not the same people. I
Right.
don't think it continues the same people. So yes, but then I did quite enjoy, what was it called? The Woman in Black. The
Oh yeah, no, that is
Daniel
definitely something.
Radcliffe.
Yeah, I want to. I would definitely want to watch that.
Mm,
As I say, it's hard. I managed to get Stu to watch Shutter Island with me, and
very good movie.
the bit near the end when he goes into it's like a prison, except it's not.
Yeah.
In this movie, that's actually quite scary. And he just kept saying to me, Heather, why are we watching a horror film? I was like, it's not supposed to be a horror film. This is not supposed to be like this.
It's a
Um,
psychological thriller.
yeah, that's why I kept saying it's a thriller. It's not horror. And he's like, I don't believe
I'm
you.
scared.
But I am going to try and convince him that he really does want to watch The Burning Girls, CJ Tudor's new series. I'm
Yep.
just not going to tell him what it's about.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I've heard positive things about that show. I've not seen it yet, so I cannot comment.
I have heard really positive things, and the book is excellent. So,
There you
but
go.
I think things like Women in Black and The Haunting of Hill House, they are fairly obviously scary movies, and I'm not going to get away with with convincing him to watch those.
Yeah. What you do? Oh, here's what you do with Woman in Black. You're like, no, no. It's about this guy. It's about this lawyer who's mourning the death of his wife, and he has to go sort out the legalities of this really this woman's house who's died, and he needs to sort out who gets the house and all that kind of stuff. It's like that. It's a drama. It's a drama, and then
I can see
when
another Shutter Island moment coming a mile
oh yeah,
away.
I mean it would happen, but like it'd be great. It'd be great. That's a good one. I genuinely like that movie. I think it's fun to watch. Like once like Halloween period, it's a fun time to watch that. It's not one that I'd say watch all the time.
Yeah.
It's also maybe not one I would say watch every Halloween, but like maybe every other, because it's fun, but if you've seen it too much, then it becomes less exciting. But I remember I saw it in cinemas for some reason. It's one of those few horror movies I saw in the cinema. Weirdly enough, went and saw a screening of it where Daniel Radcliffe introduced it, and like wasn't even a full screening. It was really weird. It was like middle of the day, Leicester Square. There was like 40 people in the room, and he was like, "Yeah, thanks for watching the movie. Bye." And I was like, "Okay, that's Daniel Radcliffe. He's about as tall as me. That's cool. Go short people." So okay, let's talk vampire movies now.
Sure.
Do you have an affection for vampire movies? Are they vampire stories in general? Are they something you like or dislike?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying. Yeah, I do like a vampire movie. Actually, I was a big Buffy fan when I was a
Okay.
teenager,
Yep.
and then Angel as well for a bit. But yeah, generally I do like a good vampire movie. Actually, and
Are
the
you a
thing
fan
is,
of Dracula?
which one?
Well, I would say book and Bela Lugosi's original. I mean, I go back to the Universal monsters. I love the Universal films.
Yeah.
To me, no other adaptation has yet to surpass those early 1930s movies, and I don't know why, but like the Dracula with Gary Oldman and Keanu Reeves is I know that on one level it's meant to be hokey, but
Mhm.
it's just too long and boring. Like
Mm.
it's not fun. It's like you could be hokey, but at least be like fun, and it's not even fun.
I find that with that one, and I tell you what else I didn't really like all that much either is Interview with a Vampire.
I've never seen it.
Yeah,
I'm not
it's the one
interested
with
in it. Tom Cruise,
Tom
right?
Cruise and
Kirsten Dunst.
yeah,
Yeah.
and some other yeah,
Yeah.
I've forgotten his name. His name has gone from me. Brad Pitt is in it. That's it. And Christian Slater.
Oh, maybe.
Christian
Yeah.
Slater?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I watched it years ago, maybe 5 years after it first came out, and I was just like, this is boring. Actually, I
Yeah.
didn't enjoy it. But yeah, the original Dracula stuff. So I remember watching Nosferatu.
Oh, yeah.
In
That's a good one. That's good.
my one of my medium film studies classes. Now, I can't even tell you why that's creepy because it's clearly all makeup. I mean, it's so obvious, it's ridiculous. It's not, it's like, obviously, it was the best they could do at the time, but
Yes.
I watched it in the early noughties and I'm like, this is creeping me out. I find this really quite weird. And I think going back to what we were talking about before, it was about the sound tech actually, because although it's there's no words, but there is sound if I remember
Yeah,
right.
the original's a silent movie,
Doors.
isn't it?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
seem to remember creaking doors, but maybe I imagined that. I don't know.
No, I can't remember now. Maybe.
It's been a while since I watched it. But yeah, the Nosferatu, super creepy.
Yes. I think that's a good example of like the creatives behind the show. It's one of those moments where like it just even though there's like maybe dated elements, it's able to transcend that because the tone is handled so well.
Mhm.
Um, and like for like example, like this is kind of maybe a lame example, but I think one of the reasons shows like Star Trek, like 1966 Star Trek, continues to be appealing today is because even though it's a little bit cheap and cheesy at times, like the concept and the story execution transcends some of the cheesy makeup.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think Nosferatu is probably one of those where it's like, looking at it by today, I can imagine some like stupid 20-year-old kid be like, "Oh, would you see the makeup? Would you tell it's fake? Oh my god." And whereas like, you know, more seasoned individuals might be able can look past that and like think about the wider context of things and appreciate what they had and what they did with it, which is what I kind of
Mhm.
think about like with the Frankenstein stuff. I mean, it's all, you can tell that they're all just running on sound stages, like you can tell those backgrounds are
Yeah,
fake and all that kind of stuff, but like there is a really, despite that, there is a creepy noir horrific atmosphere in those movies. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
What about,
I think
okay, so you,
one of my
no,
favorite vampire movies.
yeah.
No, I was gonna say one of my favorite vampire movies, and I hadn't thought about it until I was thinking about what we were gonna do, is
Mm.
Underworld. Do you know that one?
Yeah, I don't think
Oh,
I've
what's
ever
the name of
seen
the
it though.
actress? It's my mind.
It's that she's that lady
There's a
who's in
trilogy,
everything.
and it is
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
she was in Pearl Harbor. Uh, I can see her.
she's in Pearl Harbor. I barely remember Pearl Harbor. Oh yeah, Kate Beckinsale. Yeah,
Kate Beckinsale, that's it.
yeah,
She was brilliant in it. Do you know what? And that whole bringing together of werewolves and vampires was just, I don't know, it's one of these films. It was fairly big at the time and then kind of drifted away a little bit. And I was thinking about how long it had been since I watched it while I was rewatching From Dusk Till Dawn earlier.
mm,
So I really need to see that again.
yeah,
I quite liked how they take in the mythology that we all know and love
yeah.
maybe, no, and made it sort of scientific in a way.
Okay, interesting.
You know, put some full science behind it, some pseudoscience behind
Yeah,
it
yeah,
to make it into a story
yeah.
about werewolves and vampires and where they came from and all the rest of it. And actually, it's a really good film.
I should check it out. It's one of those films I remember when that came out, but I remember at that point in my young life, back when I was young, um, that was something that I had zero interest in.
Sure.
And I think it's because back in that time, early 2003, horror-y, vampire-y stuff. Even though I love the Universal monsters and stuff like that,
Mm.
that particular stuff just didn't fully appeal.
Mm.
But I have been watching little bits of that era's horror stuffs, like recent, like I think what this year, I think it was this year. Like I watched Van Helsing with Hugh Jackman. I
Mhm.
mean, it's awful. It's just
Yeah, it's terrible,
absolutely terrible movie. But
but it's
yeah,
watch I think it's still watchable though. I think it's still, it's something,
yes,
if it was on and there was nothing else on, you'd gladly sit and watch it, you
it's a
know?
good B movie. It's funny. You can watch it and laugh,
Mhm.
and you can get some enjoyment. Which leads me to something that we're talking about tonight is in preparation of talking about horror movies and the horror genre, we decided to watch From Dusk Till Dawn and chat about that specifically. Um, I watched it for the very first time last night. I'd never seen it. I knew nothing about this movie. Whatever, like pop culture reference, the only thing I knew was the feet fetish scene where the woman pours the beer down her leg and Quentin Tarantino's character Richie drinks it, and it's yeah. Other than that, I knew nothing about this movie.
A scene that he wrote himself, by the way.
Not surprised. Dude's a bit weird.
He wrote that scene himself, then cast himself to play in that scene with the pretty lady pouring whiskey down her leg and him sucking it off her toes.
I
Make
mean, part of me doesn't blame him, but part of me is like, ew.
Yeah.
There's so much ooh in this film. Okay, let's talk about it. In what's your What's your overall opinion on From Dusk Till Dawn? And then I'll tell you mine.
So it's been a really long time since I've seen this film,
Yeah.
and it's not like I remember it.
Oof.
It's not like I remember it
Oof.
at
Yeah.
all.
No.
One thing that did surprise me was that you didn't get to the vampire stuff until an hour in.
Oh my God. It's jeez.
I don't remember the intro being that long.
Oh
I
my
really
God.
don't. I thought
Yeah.
they were in the bar for
Yeah.
much longer than they were.
And they were in the bar for too long anyway. Like my takeaway on it was like overall, I didn't know what to expect, which I liked. And because I knew nothing about it, I didn't read anything about it leading up to it. I just wanted to experience the film as cleanly as possible. And like I really like the look of the film. It has that 1970s grindhouse look. And that I really liked. And there's also an element of the film where yeah, it's set in the 90s, but really it could have easily just been set in the 70s as well. It's kind of, apart from like one bit of dialogue between George Clooney's character and the character Jacob. There's where he mentions the kind of car that he wanted, and he mentions a
Yeah.
90 whatever. If you cut that out, like this film could literally just be taking
Oh,
place in the
gotcha.
70s, and because it has that gritty, dirty vibe, and so I really liked that. I was really into that, and I really liked the opening scene in the gas station.
Mhm.
It was very gritty, very noir, very unexpected. Especially how just kind of grand and very Tarantino, I guess.
Mm.
With how nuts that scene goes, and like the ending of that scene where they're walking towards the car and they're like talking about keeping a low profile while this building is blowing up behind them. It's like that's really fun and clever and funny, and I'm enjoying that. And then after that scene, like you said, it's an hour before we get to the bar, and I'm kind of like twiddling my thumbs, being like, "Where's the vampires? I thought there was vampires in this. What is going on?" I don't know if it works.
I was thinking about it as I was watching it because, like I say, such a long time since I've seen it, and I genuinely had forgotten just how long that intro was.
Yeah.
Um, but I remember thinking, this is basically a Tarantino vampire film. It's like
Yes.
it's got all the Tarantino elements, even though he didn't direct it, he wrote
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
or
It's
helped to
very
write it.
Tarantino. Very.
It's kind of like Tarantino went, I want to make a vampire, I want to write a vampire movie. Let's do it. A bit like
Yeah.
Snakes on the Plane, and to make that work, they
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's kind of
Yeah.
that whole vibe about it. But yeah, and I don't remember. I remember the reveal of the vampire being different as well. It's weird, the stuff that I've created in my mind that clearly just didn't happen.
Yeah. Has this rewatch has it gone down in your estimations then?
Yeah, I suppose it has, but it's a little bit silly now, I find.
It's
Um,
silly, but it's also like really sleazy.
yeah, but again, horror films in the 90s were like that. There was a sleazy element to most of them.
True. Okay, so let's go back to like talking about characters. Like, okay, you have like Scream, and you have Sydney,
Mhm.
who is a pretty decent protagonist. Or you have who what's another famous, the mom in Child's Play.
Hmm.
You have these protagonists that you kind of root for. And I found myself, there's a scene very early on where, Tarantino's character Richie and his brother, played by George Clooney, named Gecko. What's his first name? Anyway,
Richie? Rich?
Richie is Tarantino, and
Yes.
George is playing Seth Gecko. They're on the run because they've just robbed a bank and they're trying to get to Mexico. That's their plight. They're trying to get to Mexico, to this bar called the Titty Twister, where they're going to meet their contact in the morning after, who's going to shoo them away to their hideaway with all their money. Um, and and they have a hostage with them, this woman, and yeah, that moment when George leaves and comes back, and that
Mm.
woman is murdered and has been murdered by Tarantino's character Richie, and then you find out that Richie is a like rapist, murdering
Mm,
rapist, and like is known for that. Um, the whole vibe of the movie changes entirely because now you can kind of get behind characters who are robbers and
mm,
get the money and they want to get away. You can kind of get behind that, you know? Once that happens in this movie, the whole time I'm just thinking, you both need to be stopped. Like,
yeah,
there is
yeah, I agree.
nothing redeemable about either of you, and I hate you both. You're both disgusting. And now I have to spend another hour and a half with you. And that makes me uncomfortable.
Mm,
And I sort of was hoping that the character played by Harvey Keitel, Jacob and his family, I really was hoping that they were going to be the ones who sort of alleviate some of the sleaze.
mm,
And I like the idea that Harvey's playing this character who is a former minister who's kind of lost his faith in some way, and I was kind of was sort of expecting this a redemption arc with him, um, but even so, I, it was just I really just wasn't rooting for anybody the entire time.
no, I agree with you on that. It's one of those weird films where, I mean, like any film, you expect to be rooting for at least one person,
Someone,
anybody, just,
yeah,
but yeah, you're right. I
yeah,
mean, in this one, it was hard to root for anybody at all. I
mm,
mean, and I'm not really sure why they had to make the Tarantino character Richie, Rich. Why make him a rapist? I mean, quick to kill, I can understand. Little
yeah,
bit psychotic, perhaps.
yeah,
Little bit of a psychopath, violent man.
yeah,
But why the rapist factor? That's the bit that makes the film. It sort of takes away from the slightly fun, slightly silly aspect, and
yes,
puts in this darkness
yeah,
that kind of just doesn't need to be there. I don't think the film would work
no,
fine without that narrative.
definitely. Oh my god, yes,
They
yes,
don't even need to have the hostage.
no,
That's going to be of no benefit to them later
yeah,
at any point, even if they didn't end up in a vampire bar.
yeah,
That's not going to help their story at all.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I would really love to know why Tarantino's character was made a rapist and why they put that arc in and why they had the hostage.
yeah. I'm assuming hostage was being used because they would have needed her to probably drive them across the border while they hid probably in the trunk
True.
because that's what they use Harvey Keitel's for.
Yeah.
That's my assumption is why they had her, and I mean that makes sense, and that's why, because at one point I was thinking, man, why'd they take these guys hostage? They didn't even need them.
Oh,
And then I was like, okay, that would be why, because they need to get through the border without being seen because they're bank robbers and their pictures and stuff are probably out there, so they might get stopped.
but that woman's picture was everywhere. She was on the
That was
news.
I thought about that. Yeah, yeah. So
So
it made sense to not take her hostage and to take someone rando. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
I agree. Do you think like narratively this works? Because personally, I don't. I think this movie is like the way I described it to, because I watched it with a friend. The way I described it, I feel like it was like two screenwriters are running down a corridor with their scripts. They've just printed their scripts and they collide. And one gets the ending of the others and the other gets the beginning of the others, and they just shake it and try and make it work,
yeah,
because the beginning being this kind of gangster noir Tarantino-y pulpy fiction kind of thing was all like, I mean, there's some really cracking dialogue. There's some really cracking dialogue in some of this stuff. Like when he's like, George Clooney's character says a line. He's like, "Well, what is it? I've you know, if you have a question," he tells their first hostage, "You have a question. Um, I have a 44 who's going to answer it."
yeah.
And it's like that's a really good noir line. Like there is cracking moments and really really good isolated scenes that I thought were sizzling. But on a whole, I just thought this is a effing mess.
It's so I'm doing a lot of reading around structure, both in terms of screenplays and books and all the rest of it at the moment.
Yeah.
And everything I've read suggests this film should not work. It doesn't comply.
It doesn't work.
With, well, you know what I mean? It should never have even been popular.
Yes.
But it was at the time. It was hugely popular. Oh, I think that had a lot to do with seeing George Clooney in not an ER role, in a bad boy role. I think a lot of people watching it because of that.
Yes.
But yeah, the whole structure of this movie should not work. I mean, they should be in that bar at the end of the first act, at the latest, in theory, if we're going to talk about it accurately in terms of structure. But we were beyond the midpoint. And it just doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't at all. And then once they get into the bar, it's boring. It's very, very boring. And like, and it's the sleaze factor dials up immensely because it's like, it's a titty bar. There's a bunch of women and the tits are flopping about, and it's like you get it. It's it's a sleazy bar, blah blah blah. But like it just becomes gratuitous in a very uncomfortable and sleazy way. And the minister's a little bit uncomfortable, I think, but like the daughter doesn't seem to be, and the son is like loving it a little bit, and you're just sort of like, I need someone to acknowledge that we are kind of. I was like, okay, this is a former minister who's like descended into the bowels of hell, but like we're not even like playing with that idea very well.
He's not even wide-eyed, is he?
No, no.
He just sits down, and his son, who arguably is probably quite possibly the most religious out of the three of them in this movie, given that the pastor has lost his faith, loves it. He sat there wide-eyed, and I don't blame him for that because he's a young lad, and that's kind of what happens. But he can't have both. I don't think you can time it. It's too much of a conflict and a polarizing.
I agree. I'm gonna pause for a second because the internet on your side is pausing. So let's pause and see if it catches up, and then I can cut this out and splice it together.
Okay.
In a minute.
Sorry. I'm showing full.
Yeah, it was just one of those moments where it was dipping a little bit. I don't know if someone might be using too much internet somewhere. But yeah, it seems. I think it's leveled out now. So I'll just cut this and splice it together. Let's put a moment of silence so I can see it. Fine, cool. So like that means when I see my upload it. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree with the son stuff. He is the most religious. He's also the most annoying. I think the son is like, I'm going to tell the people at the border agents at the border. He's like, shut up! Stop being so stupid. Like he was also very dumb, and that's the other thing it was frustrating for me is at the once the vampires are out and about and there's just this onslaught of violence. Like the son dies. His Jacob dies, rightfully Richie Tarantino's character dies, but then like they introduce these other two characters, Tom Savini's sex machine, why the dick and balls gun?
No clue.
What the hell was that about?
As well, but yeah, just like
and Fred Williamson's Frost. What was he there for? Like
I feel like he was a takeoff of a character from another film, but I can't think.
I can't pin it. Yeah. Like the Nom stuff. Like I when he started going, I was like, "Why are we doing this? This is superfluous. What is going on?
Why are we doing Nom in the middle of a vampire film that's taking place in the middle of the Mexican desert?"
Yeah, it was nuts. I was just like, "What the hell is this all about?" Like, and then they all die. But then the thing is, once the vampires start coming on, so the first vampire we meet is the Salma Hayek, right?
Yeah,
the most gorgeous vampire in vampire history. Good God. I totally get that scene, why Tarantino wrote it. But like, it's the scene where she comes out and she's dancing and she's super hot, and like then she smells the blood and it turns into a vampire. And I'm thinking, okay, we've been introduced to this woman in a very big way. She must be a big player for the rest of the movie. Boom, she's dead. I'm like, wait a minute, what just happened?
I also don't remember her turning into an ugly vampire. I remember her sort of flipping her hair and then revealing that she was a vampire with the teeth and maybe some slightly weird eyes.
Yeah.
But she went full sort of alien vampire.
Yeah. I think the design and the graphics do not hold up at all.
And every vampire looked different. And I don't mean different as in each person looks different. I mean, every style of vampire was different.
Yeah.
I mean, you had some that just had the teeth and were a little bit sexy. And then you had some that were full on grotesque. And then you had some that looked like alien. And it's
like when Frost becomes a vampire and he's got this giant ass head. I'm like, what?
His legs out here.
It was nuts. Like I couldn't understand what was going on. It was I don't know. From Dusk Till Dawn was not what I was expecting. Having watched the movie, I then went and looked at some reviews. And it comes as no surprise to me that critically, even at the time, people were like, this film is dumb.
Yeah.
It had a pretty big drop off on its second week as well. So I think Clooney and was a big draw, but the takeaway that I was kind of glad to see from some various reviews at the time were that this film is like ugly and nasty, and I was like, that was the vibe. Like halfway through, my friend was like, I'm not enjoying this. I'm like, dude, I'm not either. Like I'm really uncomfortable. But I say that, and it's interesting because we're talking about horror. And while this film doesn't adhere to, I would say, the horror genre rules per se, it is still a horrific movie. Not in the sense that it's a bad movie, but I do think it is not a good movie. But like the characters, everyone is like George Clooney's character, Tarantino's character, all the vampires, everyone in that bar are just horrible, horrific, nasty, dark people.
The only person who you really want something good to happen to, I suppose, is Kate. But then she doesn't have a big enough part, I don't think.
No. Jacob is who I wanted to succeed. I wanted Jacob to come out at the end, and it was odd that Kate was the one who comes out and just hops in the RV and drives off. And I'm like, okay. I don't know how I feel about this.
Jacob reminded me of, that character reminded me of Robin Williams' character in Good Will Hunting.
Okay, I can see
that. A little bit. Both in terms of how he looked, but also in terms of how he behaved. He had he was very particular about certain things. He felt what he felt.
Yes.
But he also made allowances for other people.
Yes.
And kind of understood where they were coming from, even if he didn't think they were coming from a good place.
Yeah.
He still tried to understand that. And I just caught all these Robin Williams vibes from Good Will Hunting from him.
I can see that. I can see that. I mean, I think this film is a structural nightmare. And just totally unfocused. I think you almost needed, to me, like Harvey Keitel's character should have been the central focus of the story, not George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino, because they're just so nasty that I don't think they bring anything. They might be interesting characters on paper, but in the final execution of the movie, I just it's a very, as horror movies go, this is a very strange one, and it's one that I'm surprised people talk about with such affection because it's so nasty. So nasty.
Maybe they're like me and haven't watched it for a while.
Their memory is nothing like what the movie is.
Well, because honestly, there was so much of that movie. I was like, is there another cut that I'm not aware of, or that am I watching the wrong cut here? And I
Right.
literally went and checked to see if there was anything else that I should have been. I mean, honestly. But
Yeah.
I think one of the worst things about this movie is they made another two.
Yes. One was like straight to DVD, so that tells you how the franchise progressed. Final thoughts on From Dusk Till Dawn. Would you recommend this film to people of being a horror fan, horror aficionado? Now going back to it, is this one you'd say, as a horror person, you need to see this film, or as a horror person, stay so far away from this?
I would say if you've seen every other horror film, go in, then watch it.
I don't think I would recommend this movie at all. I would be tempted to recommend scenes
Mm.
for dialogue, moments of
Mhm.
dialogue, but I would not recommend someone sit down and rewatch this and try and uh, it's the only thing to learn from it is a bunch of stuff of what not to do, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
absolutely.
Both as
Having
a
said
yeah, go on.
I was gonna say, having said that though, Tarantino's character, whilst completely out of place in that film,
Mm,
I think he's super interesting in a standalone way. Their
yeah,
relationship as
yeah,
brothers, and how, Clooney kind of puts up with him because he's his brother, but fully appreciates the fact that he's a wrong 'un, to put it mildly.
yes,
I
yes.
think their relationship, and more Tarantino's character than Clooney's, but certainly their relationship is quite interesting in a standalone way.
Yes, it's almost like this film could have been like a dark version of oh shit, what's that movie with Butch? It could have been a dark version of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid,
Oh yeah.
where they're both outlaws, but you love them, you love Butch and you love Sundance, and you want them to succeed, but they
Mhm.
don't. This film could have been a dark version of that,
Yeah.
a dark, gritty western is really what it probably should have been.
Mm.
And it almost feels like the vampire thing was a weird afterthought.
Yeah, I mean,
Something about
even
the vampire stuff just doesn't connect with anything
no, it doesn't. I was
that
gonna
we've seen
say,
prior to that.
if you're gonna make the vampire aspect of it work, I quite like the, what should we call it? The placement of it. So
Mm,
somebody gets stranded in the desert or needs to take a break or whatever, comes across this bar, has to go inside and finds a nest of vampires.
yeah,
That kind of narrative arc is absolutely fine.
yeah.
It's the bit that comes before and the bit that comes after that's the real problem.
Totally. Yeah. Absolute nightmare of a film. Yeah, there's many other better horror movies to watch, but I mean, having said all this, From Dusk Till Dawn does make for a very interesting case study, for
It does
sure.
indeed, yeah.
Cool. Heather, this was a lot of fun. I enjoyed chatting about horror and From Dusk Till Dawn and all that stuff. Where can people find you on social media should they wish to do so?
I am on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Threads, and I'm on Blue Sky, all
Everything.
under Heather J Fitt.
There you go. There you go. So go find Heather J Fitt. Do you have any? When's your next book out? Do we know? That's
I don't have a contract. I am writing the first in a new series.
ah
I'm hoping at some point I will find somebody who wants to sell it for me.
sounds good. Sounds good. Well, we'll anticipate good things. Good things. I'm sure someone will buy the new series, but look forward to
Fingers crossed.
hearing more about it. Anyway, everyone, thanks for listening to this episode. We or I will see you next week with another fantastic guest. See you later.
Bye.
The Secret Circle.